All right, everybody, welcome. This is really exciting. We're going to speak with Franklin Parrasch this evening. Franklin is a significant, but he'll pretend he's humble, art dealer in New York City. And Franklin and I know each other, I guess, because we share a similar aesthetic. I don't know if Franklin remembers this story or not. When I did the work for the expansion of the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago, and this is a good lesson for everybody, I think. There was, I recommended 32 artists for 30 positions because I was pretty confident that they were going to like what I had to present. And one of the artists was Ai Kajima. And she makes large quilted wall-hanging pieces that are made from found materials like Laurel and Hardy and Pluto and Our Gang and Superman and Spider-Man. And some of these things were Disney characters and a lot weren't. And the folks at McCormick said, no way, we can't use her, we don't want her. And I said, what's the deal? Her art's pretty damn good. And they said, it's fabulous art. The problem is that she's got Disney images in her art. And Orlando, Florida is our biggest competitor, and we don't want anybody thinking about Orlando or Walt Disney when they're at McCormick Place in Chicago. So that for all you artists, when you get turned down by some competition you apply to or a juried event or even an art gallery, the reasons that you get turned down might have next to nothing, if perhaps nothing at all, to do with you or your art, and might be as obtuse as it is with Ai Kajima, who is now an artist that Franklin represents in New York City, and she's doing quite well. Franklin and I also shared a really strong interest in a fabulous artist who died recently, Ken Price, and is one of the greater artists, I think, of the last 100 years. That said, let's ask Franklin a loaded question to start with. Franklin, where did you go to high school, and did you have any inkling that this is where you were going to end up when you were a high school kid?
Probably. I went to high school in a suburban high school in New Jersey called Riverdale High School. Grew up pretty conventional middle-class family in New Jersey, but I did take a liking to art as a child, and I think it's not too way out of line with the way I was thinking about my future that I ended up in this business. I did start out as an artist.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I mean, I sort of thought you'd be an artist. When did you last make art?
I would say right after college, not long after. What I ended up doing for undergrad, I did sort of, for lack of better terminology, it was art history, but it was in the philosophy department at Hampshire College. And I did my thesis on a budding young photographer named Stephen Shore, who was about 40 years old at that time. And it was kind of unheard of to do a thesis in 1982 on a 40-year-old artist. And I persevered and I did it. Got a lot of recognition with museums. And I think that's one aspect of how I got involved with curating in museums and discussing doing shows with galleries.
What kind of job did you have coming out of college?
Well, then from there I went to grad school at RISD.
Okay.
In photography itself and the practice of it, which is a big component of what I was doing in undergrad as well. So graduating from RISD, I really had a decision to make whether I was going to go that way or the other. But it was at RISD that I came across the museum there during the grad shows, and there was a show of what I thought was brilliant installation art, but what it was in fact art furniture, which I had never even heard of. You know, at the time I was involved with installation art. I liked Vito Conchi, Judy Bass, and I was very intrigued with the idea of these forms being in a room and that was the artwork. But in fact, they were individual artworks, and I learned about it a bit and became slightly obsessed, and within a few months had made this decision that I was going to open a gallery devoted to this medium.
How did you get from, where was your, did you do that? Did you open a gallery?
Yeah, this was 1986, which was sort of the tail end of the boom of the art world, if you recall.
Right.
And what I first ended up doing to get a gallery was I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And I went to the Washington Post and looked in the real estate section, and I found a gallery space, no rent in exchange for managing the building. The building was a hotel, but it wasn't just a hotel. It was a hotel of you rent by the hour or half day, or which they didn't tell me, of course, and I was a fairly innocent 26-year-old, and I learned the hard way what that meant.
So you became a madam overnight?
It was an interesting experience. And that's what I did for my first year of being in business, and quickly made clients, significant clients, and within that first year was able to get enough dough together to move to DuPont Circle and R Street, which is where all the galleries were back then.
Right.
Get my own space, and that's essentially how it got started.
How long were you in Washington?
3 years, from '86 till '89.
Describe what your aesthetic was early on. I feel like it's changed.
Yeah, it has changed, and in a very surface way. It's changed tremendously. In a very philosophical way, it's kind of just evolved and built on what was an initial investigation into why people make things and why they make them, where they do, and how they do. And the thing that intrigued me about furniture was that this was 1986, and there were people making furniture individually and in shop studios that were once the studios where furniture was made in the late 18th century, early 19th century, hundreds of years before. And so I was intrigued with the sort of repetition of history, or the adaptation of a historical mode into a contemporary situation, and why people were doing it, and why they were doing it as an art expression. And it was just simply an investigation. But the core of what I'm interested in is evolution itself. And what I'm looking at is art that reflects a way of seeing from the past how to take the future forward. So the furniture kind of fit into it, because especially at that time, it was kind of a radical expression. It was a way of saying, well, we're going to look at people that were very exciting at that time, like Julian Schnabel and David Sally, and say, okay, well, you're making this, which is almost a materialistic experience, and we're going to take that experience and convert it to an art experience that is functional. And that was intriguing to me, because these were artists that had trained as artists, had their MFAs, and knew as much about art history as any other MFA. They decided to make things that were functional.
So I'm thinking of people like Richard Archwager and Donald Judd. Were those people that were on your radar then?
Yes, very much so. Very much in Archwager in particular.
And do you feel like the gallery embodies that same interest, curiosity now?
I do. Again, it's built on itself. It's obviously gone through a variety of mediums, fields. There are generations of artists that have come about that have done incredibly radical things with art, and then intrigued.
Can you differentiate this from technical proficiency and expand it to, contrast that? Because I think there's some dealers who tend to focus on technical excellence in the artwork, perhaps let me not be too crass, but perhaps as a hedge against passing judgment on it. I sense that your vision is larger. Okay. So,
I don't see technical proficiency as anything more than a means to an end. We can refer to our friend Ken Price, our late friend, who had enormous technical proficiency in his chosen medium, but it was a means to an end. It was not anything, nothing he did in itself was technically impressive. It was the expression, what was important, and it could not have been achieved without the ease with which he handled his materials and the lack of obsession that would be needed to make the work that he did. He simply knew how to do it as a first language. And I think that technical proficiency has a place in facilitating expression, but it's of no use as an end of
Sorry. I sense that you, as a dealer, do you differentiate between dealer and gallerist?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I don't particularly care for either term.
What do you call yourself, dude?
Art dude. Gallery guy, that's the guy in Gallery Knox County used to call me gallery guy. Look, I own a gallery, obviously. I sell art, obviously, so certainly all the components of dealer and gallerist are in both. But, you know, gallerist is sort of a term that it puts you like a cellist, like you're playing the gallery. I like that one better than dealer because dealer really limits the scope of what you're doing. It's not just selling and buying. It's formulating ideas that lead to selling and buying. Fine, art dealer is fine, gallerist is fine, but I don't think either one of them is particularly brilliant.
Yeah, and I personally don't see much difference between gallerist and dealer. I think they're sort of like one's just shining, you know.
Yeah.
But all right, now I sense that your vision is fairly unique. Are there other dealers that have a shared vision?
You have a couple guys in your town that I like, Corbett and Dempsey. I like those guys. I think they have.
I like them too. But how do you feel like your visions are similar?
Well, I've talked to those guys a lot, and I think their sense about evolution is very active, and I think that they're a very idea-based gallery, and I think they look cross-generationally at where they can choose art from. But I'm not here to brand them, but I think there are people out there that embrace ideas themselves and build the gallery around those ideas. Not everyone does it in their own way. They have their own agenda and their own set of values that they're advancing. But I don't think I'm unique in that sense. I mean, maybe my ideas are a little bit wackier than theirs. Other than that, you know.
All right, so you know, most artists, and you know, everybody we're talking to in this group are artists, and they'll have questions in a moment. Right. But I feel like I tell artists to come from their core, to experience who they are, to explore and delve into who they are, right. and to be vulnerable and have their own unique vision because they're unique by definition, right. and not necessarily try to follow trends or second guess, but to come from within themselves. Is that same advice good for an art dealer?
I think it is. I really think it's fine advice for an art dealer.
I think most art dealers follow that advice, but I can think of one dealer who maybe I should have on here, but he doesn't tend to be as forthcoming, who I think, you know, second guesses the market and, you know, chooses exhibits with his ears, mm-hmm. and is doing phenomenally well because I don't think he has a vision of his own.
Well, phenomenally well is a relative term.
Well, phenomenally well means he's made a few $1 million every year.
Okay, well, that's fine. And one can do that in any arena, in any format that they choose. But
does that sort of, I can't find the right word, but does that sort of lack integrity for you?
It lacks purpose. I don't want to.
Okay, fair enough.
Integrity, but I fail to see the purpose in any sustainable, long-term way. One thing I do kind of strive for or focus upon is, you know, I'm looking very long-term at what this all means. It is not simply about making a few $1 million a year. It's about carrying what we're handling, the ideas, the material, the collectors, and the collections as well into the future, both in terms of their aesthetic value, their political and social value, and of course their economic value. And I'm looking, 50 years, 100 years, way after I'm gone. And I try to set something up that's sustainable.
That's cool.
If you follow what I mean.
I follow what you mean. One person's commented they can't hear you quite well enough, and maybe I want you to bellow a little more. I can hear you fine, but I don't,
Okay.
maybe you're a little soft-spoken.
Who is that? Is that Andy York?
No, it wasn't Andy. Do you know Andy?
No, but I like that painting in back of him. What is that?
Oh, Andy. Wait a minute, Andy. We've unmuted you. Go ahead.
No, that's just a painting that's in the works at the moment.
Ah, okay, I see it. Yeah. It reminds me of Peter Saul. That's why I like it.
It does, doesn't it, a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, Andy. Your 15 seconds are over. Thank you. All right, so Franklin, the art world is changing, and I suspect that the internet has something significant to do with that. And you are, I mean, do you do much email?
Yes, everything's email.
You do, but all right. So when you're sort of passing off on being proficient at the internet.
I am completely technically illiterate. And I have to have people do absolutely everything for me. You're right.
So do you answer your own emails? Can you open your own emails?
I can open emails and answer them, yeah. But
you just like Jerry Salz, who did a webinar with us, who says, I can't do anything, and then he proceeds to do everything.
Yes, I know, and he has the largest email list there is. No, I don't do Twitter, and I don't do Facebook.
And your daughter's not on Facebook either, is she?
Who is?
Madeline.
She's on Facebook.
She is? I couldn't find her.
Oh, yeah, she has quite a Facebook list, or whatever you call it.
All right, so let's talk about how the art world is changing. I mean, to some extent it's changing. This is where we're segueing to that morally safer
yeah, that's a very good thing to demarcate a 2-decade span of time. And I don't know if you took a look at the 92 piece that he did prior to
I sent a link to that. It was 93. I sent a link to everybody in the class, and I sent a link to the one from last night to everybody, and I sent a link on Jerry's comments about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jerry had comments about the 93 piece?
No, last night's piece.
Well, it was very interesting to see both of them. I watched them, sequentially. And it was interesting to see his failure to perceive the depth of Cy Twombly and Robert Ryman, and then go on to glom, everything else that he despised about art with it. And for the most part, I was disappointed in the lack of depth of his coverage as a reporter. I think he was very simplistic and one-dimensional in his approach to the subject he was covering. But the reality is there are some issues socially that are brought out by both of those pieces he did about our country, about our civilization and our values. That are significant, and if we examine those are interesting pieces he did, and in particular last night, because as you know, we were there and watching it all, and the disposable income he's talking about is it's a gargantuan amount, and it serves only to enhance the particular the whims of those who are spending that money. And when you consider the world, the state it's in, the state of education, the state of poverty in this country, it's kind of freakishly off kilter with reality. And that in itself, I think, is a subject matter, which perhaps had he focused on that, I would have had a little more sympathy.
Okay, my sense is that anytime I read or watch an article, I think it's the authority, and anytime I'm cited or quoted or they're discussing something that I'm involved in, They're ignorant. You know, they never go into enough depth with that. You know,
right,
so
there was enough depth. Yeah, yeah, and I think there was there was an argument to be made on both sides, and neither side presented it very well.
I agree, and I don't know. Do you want to comment out loud about Jeffrey Deitch and being a museum director and him and all that stuff?
Jeffrey, I respect him. I think he's interesting. He did what we all fantasize doing, stepping away from the commercial world and playing museum director for a while. I suspect he won't be doing it terribly long. And out of choice, probably. He's a very, you know, he likes to experiment. And he likes to try things, and he did a really great job with Art in the Streets. I thought that was a brilliant show. And I don't envy the job of raising money for the MoCA there. It's not an easy place to sustain. But I respect him.
You know, you've done, I mean, I think your gallery is a bit of an anomaly in terms, I mean, you've done some of these cooperative things with Tim Nye and Nye House. Are you doing that still?
Not in terms of art fairs, no. We're probably going to do more cooperative shows with other galleries. I want to sort of expand the idea of doing that and being connected with other galleries. And tell
me what the motivation is.
I think it's related, again, as I said, I'm interested in evolution. I'm interested in group selection. And so I'm interested in the idea of taking two very kind of single-minded forms, which are galleries, and crossing them and letting them share and see what happens. It's a kind of cross-pollination process. And it was very interesting. As you know, Tim and I did some amazing shows.
Yeah, definitely.
If I might, say. And the process was, very eye-opening. It's not easy to work with someone who's very intent on doing one thing and you're intent on doing another. But you have to sort of build and share and expand on your ideas, and it can be very productive. And I think more galleries should do it, which is why I want to do it with more galleries. And I think I will be, you'll be seeing more of that in the future in our gallery.
How about the question all these artists want to ask, and that is, how do you find, I mean, let's not go to the new artist right away, but how do you, there are a number of artists that you are working with now that I don't know, how long have you been working with Craig Hoffman?
Since '03.
Okay, so and then you took a particular tact, is that simultaneous, about the early aughts to '03, to do something with Southern California artists of significance and under attention?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that had largely to do with Ken Price, who I had been showing since the early '90s, and he had moved galleries at that point. As you recall, in '03, he started showing with Matthew Marks, and but never really, kind of separated. He still stayed loyal. We still had a relationship. But one thing he did was he introduced me to a lot of people that he liked, that he thought I should pay attention to, and that is getting to the answer of what you're referring to here. Is how do dealers find artists? It's largely, in my case, through other artists. Other artists have more impact on me than anyone else in terms of putting material in front of my eyes, saying, "Look at this. This is something I like." And one of the convenient ways that that's translated is you're already accustomed to this artist. You're already developed a relationship with their visual vocabulary, and you can then take that and let it expand into someone else's work through their eyes. It's very helpful. Because art is not so easy to just digest quickly and formulate an opinion on. Even if you're passionate about something, there are many, many layers to art that you really have to spend time and a great deal of energy to thoroughly get. before you get to the point where you actually want to put it in your gallery and represent it.
Or put it in your home too, as a collector, yeah. I think frequently.
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
Was a catalyst in that. And the woman you just mentioned, Ikejima, was brought to my attention through a local artist there, Nick Cave, who really told me, you've got to show her. This is great art. No one's showing her. And I did take a shining to it right away.
She was Nick Cave's studio manager. But you never showed Nick, did you?
We've done group shows with Nick. And
okay.
We're going to do a show in our Chelsea space involving him.
But didn't you used to have an affinity for ceramics in particular?
Mainly through Ken Price and also Peter Volkos, who I was also very enamored with, and Ken was as well.
But I would say that at least half or more of your aesthetic was ceramics 10, 15 years ago. Is that true?
We did a lot of ceramic shows 15 years ago, yeah.
All right, so now, did you control the pace that you evolved? Because I changed my gallery from showing abstract stuff to stuff that plugged in. And I did it too quickly, and I think I lost my audience, which was part of the reason I, shifted gears and left the gallery world. Did you do it more slowly? Did you integrate it better than I did, or did?
Yeah, no, I did slowly. The integration was connected. I mean, there's a relationship between Peter Volkos and Craig Hoffman. Beyond the geographic relationship, there's actually an aesthetic history that is quite connected in its roots. In the 50s, they were working and showing in the same places, and the awareness of their work was a shared experience in the early 60s. So it wasn't that radical, even though if you take a piece of orange plastic by Hoffman and put it next to a black stack ceramic by Volkos, they look entirely different. There was a shared experience and an awareness by both artists of each other that it's not a huge leap. And commercially, it's also not a huge leap.
That raises a different question. Do you try to have prices in different categories and try and cover the basis of your collector-client affinity?
I don't know if I try to do that, but I definitely do that. Yeah, I mean, we have, our price range is $5,000 to $2 million, and I have clients that are, students, and I have clients that are, struggling, but they buy art, and then of course you have the people that get off their planes. So, it's a wide open field of who we sell to, and the price range is vast.
Let me ask you some questions that I've asked other dealers, and I find the answers interesting. This has to do with the responsibilities of an art gallery, and then we'll get to, we'll go to what you think the responsibility of an artist are. Is it a gallery's responsibility to pay shipping both ways?
Not necessarily.
Should we leave it at that?
I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah, not necessarily. And I will say this, and this is something that's very important for artists to understand. Galleries are businesses. They are non-institutions set up for a receipt of some accolade. They are businesses with whom you're essentially, in the sense of a vendor, you are selling a product through that vendor. And there are necessities on the part of each, the artist and the gallery, that alter in each situation. And there are demands that can and should be met by galleries that are different in each situation. I would just caution artists to be aware of the fact that being open to all ideas about how to work with a gallery is the most productive way to approach a gallery. Not all galleries should be treated the same. Not all artists should be treated the same. Not all experiences between artists and galleries should be the same. And they should be formulated between the artist and the gallery in a very open manner, so that there are no false expectations or expectations that cannot be met, because otherwise people get disappointed, and that that can lead to some bad experiences. But I don't like to put the idea of there are rules that galleries have to follow. There are no rules. The one thing about this business, and Tim Blum mentioned it yesterday on a TV show, is that this is an unregulated business. There are no rules. There is almost nothing that we are required to do, except for now there's a resale tax in the state of California. Other than that, there's very little regulation. And whether that's good or bad, it is simply the reality, and you should just be aware of that.
Okay. Contracts, separate, distinguishable from consignment agreements. Do you have contracts with artists?
Believe it or not, I'm of the generation of the handshake, and no, I don't.
I think just about every dealer I know of, an artist I know of, would say the same thing. But you do have consignment agreements, right?
We have all kinds of agreements. We have lawyers that have written up everything, but I rarely use them.
I know. I think that's true.
Of course, we have to, but for artists, we rarely use any of that.
How many artists do you represent?
I think at the moment it's only about 15 or so.
But you have working relationships with other artists or their artwork?
Everything, including the working relationship.
Okay.
And then we do, we have the Chelsea space. I don't know if you've been following that over the last year. We're working with other galleries. We're working with artists that we've never worked with before. And we're really just focusing on ideas purely in terms of pairing different artists together from different generations, looking at work in different ways and different periods of artists' works in different ways. And sometimes we'll only show them that one time, and that may be it. And we may be very involved for the month or month and a half that we're showing the work, and then go on to the next, and still have a relationship with the artist, but not a business relationship.
How many people work for you?
Only about
Chris and Catherine, and who else?
Catherine, Mike, and 5.
And what happens when you go to an art fair?
There's usually 2 or 3 of us that go. We have part-timers too that cover.
What's your opinion about art fairs?
Well, boy, that's changed everything.
Yes, it has.
And it's funny because I used to think, oh, this is great. You just do art fairs every other week practically, and it's better than waiting around in the gallery. But they're very taxing. They are very labor intensive. But they're extremely productive. And it's a very successful commercial model. Is it interesting? Is it a way for an artist to be understood? Absolutely not. It's ridiculous in that sense. And the need for a gallery to exist as a place for art to be contemplated, discussed, criticized, that need is even more poignant in the face of all these art fairs. Because art fairs are just simply a commercial vehicle. That's all they do. It's a social vehicle too, as we know. But they really facilitate sales in a very effective way. They can't be achieved in a gallery.
How many art fairs are you doing a year?
Well, this year we're going to do Dallas next week, Nada in May, possibly Art Chicago, Trees, Oslo.
Trees in the New York Freeze show?
No, the London.
London? Have you done London before?
No, this will be new.
Okay.
And then that'll be my year. I think that's enough in 1 year. We're not.
You're going to do Miami in December, the Basel show in December?
Yeah.
Were you in that before?
We were in it last year and the year before.
Okay. And is Basel the biggest cost? The one that said, you have to invest the most in?
Enormous, yeah.
And with the likelihood of the greatest return?
By far.
Yeah. Let's see if some other people got some questions. Corbin, your hand has been up for a while. You got a question?
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And thank you, Franklin. This might have already been answered. It might also be a rhetorical question, but is it safe to assume that, say, take at least New York City, for example, and Chicago, LA, that most dealers are, well, I was prompted to ask this question because I thought it was interesting that you studied philosophy and you have such a philosophical approach to the way that you approach art and show it. Do you think most dealers, at least in New York City, have a philosophical approach, and also are they well versed in critical theory? Do they read theory? Do they do they go that far? Or
I don't know most dealers well enough to make an answer to that. Quite a few that I know, however, do. Barbara Mathis is a friend of mine, for example, very well versed in art history, and speaks several languages and really is a learned person. Less so philosophically guided in her program in the gallery, but there's a broad understanding of the world and history that a lot of these dealers that I know share. I would say that their passions intellectually are varied, but they're a very interesting lot of people, art dealers.
That's what I would assume. I just think it's interesting to balance, somebody who's really into, I keep using the word critical theory or philosophy, and then also having to sell things that represent that to them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's not always represented in their galleries. That's the funny thing.
I guess that's what I'm asking, really. Yeah.
You wouldn't always know who the, philosophy people are, or who the history people are, or who the music aficionados are by their galleries, but there are some very interesting people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corbin. Sharon, go ahead.
I was wondering, do you think that art is still regional? Do you think that, say, Detroit, I'm from Detroit area, and I've heard Paul's description of Chicago, and I think it's really very much like Detroit. But do you think there's a distinct, maybe I don't know if you even know the difference or if you're familiar with Detroit art, or if there's difference between Chicago and Detroit art, say, and New York?
So wait a minute, what's the question?
No, that's what I want to know.
Is there a regional difference between Detroit and New York?
Well,
Chicago, or any discussion?
I think of Mike Kelly as a Detroit artist. I don't know if that counts, but obviously Chicago has its long history, and it's a pretty interesting one, and it has to do with figure, and it has to do with objects, and it has to do with obsession. And I don't know if that's because of the region or just simply because of the way people studied art in that region. But I do think Chicago has its own particular set of aesthetics that it seems to share, and I think people like Nick and Akijima come out of that. In Detroit, I have shown a few artists from Detroit, very similar in a certain sense to the artists that are in. I mean, I obviously have Cranbrook, so that kind of helps define the MFA kind of aspect of Detroit, and you have the Detroit artists too. But I think that these regions do have particular values that are expressed in their work. LA certainly has a brand essentially going for it, and sometimes that's exploited commercially, and perhaps Chicago is going to eventually go that way. But for us dealers, region, you have to understand it's one thing to say it's an aesthetic or something to identify. It's also a marketable entity. And if it's marketable, there will be dealers out there who will, seize on that and take it forward. I haven't done so with Chicago, really. We obviously have works by Paschke, and we've worked with as I said, Nick. And I'm interested in Chicago and the connections there, like, for example, H.C. Westerman. But we have never done anything extensive with Chicago in particular.
Cool. Thanks, Sharon. All right, Patricia, your turn. Go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you, Franklin, for talking to us. I have 3 questions, and I'll state them, and then I'll be quiet.
Did you say 6?
3.
Okay.
Normally I usually have a lot of questions.
I'm going to get out my notebook here.
No. Okay, so first of all, I was curious if you go to other openings, and if so, how many in a year? And then you mentioned that you were interested in going to Art Chicago. Why would you go? Because it sounded like you haven't committed yet. And then the third one, do you think an artist has to have an MFA?
I'll answer the last one first. No.
Okay.
I think getting an MFA is a smart thing to get if you want to be involved in the art world. If you want to work in a gallery or a museum or with a collection, with private collectors, even as an art handler. An MFA is a smart thing to get because you understand the values of art, you understand how people relate to art, and you understand what your place is or what your place could be professionally in the art world by getting that MFA and getting that experience. But to be an artist, I really don't understand. I made that pursuit myself, and it's good professionally to understand how galleries work and all that, but I'm not sure they're doing a lot of instruction in that capacity in MFA programs. And I really do think if one has talents and gifts, one can make that happen without a school. Technical knowledge is important, and to some degree, MFA programs cover that, but I really don't see the demand for it. There's really great artists in the world who have never gotten MFAs, and I don't think it's an absolute necessity at all.
There seems to be a question that comes up. It seems to be a question that comes up a lot, and the answers seem to be pretty consistent. Pretty much, if you want to teach, yeah, it's a good idea, but otherwise, you probably don't need it.
Yeah, if you want to keep it off, yes.
All right, so there was a question then about Chicago. What is that called? Expo Chicago.
Oh, I don't want to answer that question. Go in next.
Oh, okay. So you go to art openings, and how many a year?
Do I go to art openings? I do go to some. Generally, if there's a museum show that we're involved with in some manner, I'll go to that. Gallery openings, I almost never go to, unless we're involved in it, and even that, I don't usually get though.
When you have a gallery, Patricia, it's sort of like you've gone to enough damn openings, and you always have to put on a smiley face. And I write these art letters so that I don't have to go to the openings very often, And for me, the best, most fun is going, during the installation. But I think a lot of, let's change the question, Franklin. Do you go to other gallery exhibits?
Yes.
Yeah, but you don't need to go there to be seen. You don't need to go there.
I don't want it to be seen, very specifically.
Oh, okay, that is probably more accurately what I was asking.
Yeah.
Was, if you went.
Yeah,
isn't it nice, Franklin, when you're in another town and you can go to galleries incognito and they don't rush up to you and go, ooh, Mr. Dealer?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Patricia, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Joyce has a question. Go ahead, Joyce.
In talking with artist friends of mine, I've heard comments that they and I have received at various times that the comment is, I love your work, but I couldn't sell it. In other words, I don't have clients that would buy your work. Could you comment on that? And also, if you were to take on an artist's work that is slightly different from a direction that you're going in, would you then go and cultivate clients that might be interested in that work?
I would say that it's possible that I would, and in fact I have. I'm working with an artist named Rita Ackerman at the moment, whose work is on the surface very different than anything else I handle. And it does involve cultivating new clients. And it does involve going to museum shows and openings that I would otherwise not go to. It's very possible for a dealer to connect with an artist and their art and shift focus or shift their intent commercially and include something in, and maybe it can be good because it can be an expansion of a client base. So I would say that when people say they can't sell your work, they may or may not want to, but the reality is if there are dealers, they can, because honestly what we're doing here is if we can sell any art, we can sell all of it. It's just a matter of energy and focus.
Is the converse true, that dealers take on work that they may not like, but they think they can sell? And what percentage of the
I have done that, and I've regretted it. And it bites you in the ass. Every time. And I know there are plenty of galleries that do nothing but that, and it seems to work for them. But for me, it's a bad idea. And I have done it, I confess. And it's a funny question you ask. But I think, the other thing to realize is that your careers as artists need not be focused on galleries. I think it's look at people like Forrest Best, who went their whole lives. He had shows with one gallery for a portion of his career. But, there are artists out there who are enormously talented and whose careers will never be represented in galleries. And I think that's okay. And I think it's okay for the work to be preserved and to wait. Maybe wait even past your own lifetime for the work to be discovered. It happens. It happens often. And with the way the art world is working right now, that the volume of art collectors versus the volume of art that is relevant, that people want, it's going in this other direction where 50 years from now, people are going to need something that no one appreciated now. I guarantee that is happening. The question is, with what art? It isn't a matter of if. And, don't feel that it is entirely necessary to validate your art by having a gallery represented. It's not necessarily a validation. It's not a validation to not have representation. So I think I just want to say that. I don't know any of your work. I don't know any of the names that are on here. But I can tell you that if you really feel you're doing something that's relevant, the most important thing you can do is preserve the art. Store it correctly, save it, record it, document it. If you can get people to write about it, great, because it'll find its place if it's relevant, if it's worthwhile. It will find its place. Whether you put it in front of a dealer or a dealer finds you or not, it'll eventually happen. If the work has importance, it will happen.
So dying first is an asset?
No, it's definitely not an asset. And I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying don't show at galleries. I'm saying,
no, I understand.
I'm saying don't think that that's the only way to validate your art. It's really not.
I think that shows a lot of integrity on your part, Franklin. I think that's a really beautiful thing you've just expressed. I'd kiss you, but there are too many people around.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's go to Patrick. Go ahead, Patrick.
How are you, Franklin?
Hey, Patrick.
Hey, nice to meet you. Two questions. First question, why is Damien Hirst so huge? Why? I don't understand.
It's funny because he has that Tate opening right now, and I was listening to the radio talking about it. And listen, this really is an issue of extreme excess in wealth. He is an interesting artist, and certainly was at the roots of his practice in the early 90s. I found him very interesting because he does mix issues of beauty and commerce and depth and decay in I think very poetic ways. But he has really changed and become very obsessed with the money aspect of it. And I know his work is partially about commerce, but I don't find its exploration of commerce to be very compelling or interesting. What is compelling and interesting is that people feel a need to spend, calling enormous sums is, I guess, an understatement. And he has really taken the idea, the Warholian idea of being a commercial success to some other stratospheric level. What makes people pay all this money for it? Is that basically your question, Patrick?
Yeah, and also why is he so popular? I don't get it. I can't see it.
He's pretty. Those dots they're
well. I'm pretty also, but I'm not.
You are. I can see that. You know, but if you go on someone's wall, maybe you'll be popular. No, I've seen his work in a number of homes, and I've always thought it was beautiful. There's something very peaceful about it.
Okay.
And I'm not a huge critic of him, but I have to say the attention commercially to him is grotesque. It offends me, and I think it's a testament to the unbridled nature with which our industry proceeds with things when it can. And as I said before, this is a completely unregulated industry. And I suppose if it were, the first regulation would be to curb the excesses of people like Mr. Hirst. But I don't get why it sells for the money it does. Would I like to have a dot painting? You know, I would take it if you gave it to me. Would I?
You and me both.
You know, but I always say that's a litmus test for me for buying art. Would I take it if you gave it to me? And the surprising answer is that I take very little.
Okay.
I don't like things that much unless I really love them and want them with me all the time. So,
all right. The second question.
I'm sorry. I'm mystified by it all as you are.
Okay. The second question is, I'm working on a piece. It's 6 feet by 4 feet, oil on canvas, and it's of Maurice White, the former lead singer of Earth, Wind & Fire.
Oh. Yeah.
And he has Parkinson's.
Yeah.
And this idea came to me that this painting that I'm working on could actually cure what he's going through. And I've contacted a few people that are close to him. My question is, I feel that I should just give him the painting. I mean, that's where it came from. So I feel I should just give him the painting. And it's taken me about 2 months so far to finish the painting. But also, speaking about commerce, I would also like to, be compensated somewhere in the area for the painting. So I'm a little conflicted with what's happening with the painting right now.
Right. That's a very interesting dilemma, and You know, I'm going to just tell you an example of something. I just wrote a very large check to an artist for a royalty, an artist I've never even met,
Okay.
for a royalty. And I felt great about doing so because this artist's work has given so much to me over the years, so that I have no delay in doing so. It was a lot of money. I can tell you what it made a difference in my life financially to keep the money. And it was not, I was not compelled by law to write that check. I just did it, and it felt great. And I can only tell you that if this will make you feel good, you know, there are a lot of money. I don't know how necessary it is for you to get compensated financially. I'm not in your situation, but if you can do it, and you feel good doing it, and you feel like it's the right thing, you know, there's a lot of years we have to live with ourselves. And if it feels like the right thing, I think you're best off doing whatever you feel is the right thing.
Okay. My intention is to make him well. That's it. All right. Thank you, Frank.
What a bunch of beautiful human beings we got here. I'm going to keep it going. All right, Greg, your turn.
Hi, Franklin. Thanks very much for speaking with us. I have 3 quick questions.
Sure.
The first one is, it falls along the line of what Patrick was talking about with Damien Hirst and his polka dot paintings, and they're all shown in the Gogosian galleries. And Gogosian has been on record as saying that, you know, he has all these galleries around the world, and therefore this has become the largest painting in the world. How often do gallerists see themselves as artists? And
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Greg. I'm sorry.
okay, is this any
Much
better?
better.
That's a little better.
Much better.
So, how often do artists or do gallerists see themselves in the role of, say, Orson Welles, using other people's work, other artists, as their own, on their own canvas, in the large scale, writ large, like Gogosian has done?
You mean, well, Gagosian, I think, had this idea because he wanted to celebrate something that that Hirst did many years ago, and has done over the years in different periods of his career. I'm not sure. I want to get specifically what it is exactly. Is he using the artist as a way of expressing what he sees as a vision of that artist, or what is it exactly?
Yeah, is he using the artist as an expression of what he sees as a vision, not necessarily maybe of that artist or maybe of his own vision?
I think it is largely a shared vision. I think the two of them collaborated quite a bit from what I read. I don't know Larry well at all, and I don't know Damien Hirst at all, and I've not talked to either of them about this, so I'm only going by what I've read and heard in the news. But from what I understand, it was very much a collaborative effort, even though it was Larry's original idea. I think that's a very good thing in general, and I think it's very productive to engage artists with projects that are driven by ideas from the dealer's perspective, and to whether you have interest in these dot paintings in 11 galleries or not, is the fact that it exists and we are talking about it is a cultural phenomenon, and it's something of interest. And if it were something else, it would be even more interesting, perhaps. But I think the concept of it is sound, and it's a good idea.
Is this where it's going?
Or is it the way it's going?
Is this where it's going?
I think people want to get attention. I mean, I think there are a lot of galleries that are following Larry's footsteps. Emmanuel Peridin, for example, is a guy who sees projects as the primary means by which he's motivated to show art. And I think there are galleries that are getting a lot of attention, and when they do that, I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's the only thing. There's more and more galleries and more artists and more collectors. So I would expect that more ideas and experiments will be tried, and we'll see how they all work.
Okay. I had two more quick questions. One, everybody talks about how the internet has become this game changer, and I kind of see it as a communication game changer, but it doesn't really change the way that, in my mind, the art market has worked, the art world works. I think that art fairs have been more of a game changer in that respect than the internet, and yet everybody talks about how the internet has changed things. I'm just wondering where people can go on the internet where they can engage in contemporary discussions with other people when they are not able to get to art fairs. It seems that most of the discussion online with commercial venues happens with people who are
Greg, you faded. It's been fading, and it disappeared.
I got the gist of your comment, Greg, and I completely agree. I don't see the web as being a tremendous game changer for my business. It's obviously a lot quicker to email a picture than it is to get a transparency and aesthetics. But other than that, I really think that these art fairs are definitely game changers. They've enormously affected the way everybody does business, and they've expanded this business tremendously. And the internet, I think, is good for communicating quickly, but the material is still the same material.
Okay. Are we in a bubble?
No. I'm just going to keep going. You mean commercials?
Right.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
There are
Thank
no
you.
bubbles. We are in a long-term scramble for self-identification that's going to absorb more excess wealth than anyone has any idea exists.
Okay, thanks.
It's not going to end anytime soon.
Franklin's pretty clear.
This time it's different.
We're getting to it being about wrap-up time. Jeff, go ahead.
The NCAA, the finals are soon, so, we better get off soon.
Yeah, well, I got another webinar after this one, so don't let anybody know.
Okay.
Jeff, go ahead.
Franklin, I think I heard that you had 15 artists in your gallery?
About that, yeah, that I work with.
Then, I would have to imagine that you treat them pretty well, and they must treat you well. I see a lot of galleries. I'm just now starting to approach galleries, and a lot of them have 50 and 75 artists. Are there many like you that are so committed to a small number of artists?
No, actually, I used to joke, and Paul, you'd get this one. I'm very, I'm almost overly involved with Ken Price's work. And I used to joke around saying I'm a one gallery artist, and we don't even represent the artist. One artist gallery, and I don't even have a lot of contact with a lot of these artists. You have to understand it's a very unstructured relationship with the artists. Sometimes we see each other once a month. Sometimes a year goes by. Sometimes it's every day. It just depends, and it's interesting because there are people that we show on a regular basis, but we spend very little time with them.
So you're still selling enough to make everybody happy, yourself and the artists included.
Well, we also don't have exclusives on anyone.
Right.
And that's something I believe in also. And I think if we're going to talk about a trend or a way in which galleries are going to adapt, I think that's one of them. This idea that there's a stable and that people have a contract and that they can only show at this one gallery. I think that was an idea in the 1960s that has no application now. The stable gallery came and went, and it was a fine thing for its time, but it has no application to the global society that we have now, where ideas and people are shifting and moving, and there should be no boundaries to people. I don't like boundaries. I think they're effectively damaging to everyone on both sides. Yeah. And I like to say that the rotating 15.
Thank you.
Cool. Franklin, is there anything you want to say in summation? You know, the last words of wisdom for artists who are going to take this home and sleep on it and become famous based on what you say, or anything else?
Well, I mean, I want to reiterate: don't think the sun rises and sets on what galleries do or say. It really doesn't. And I'm sure you've probably heard that a few times before, but I want to reiterate that because you know, you're doing something that is essential to humanity. And when you get in that studio and you're working, just, you know, understand that that's why you're there. And if you're not there for that purpose, choose another line of work. But if you're there because you can't not be there, that's because you're doing something that's essential. And if it's essential for you, it's fair to say that it has an essential component to the rest of us. Don't think the sun rises and sets over what an experience. I'm sure we've all had bad experiences with galleries, myself included. If you feel discouraged by things that you hear from galleries, try to develop a thick skin about it all because it's irrelevant in the long term.
Franklin, I think you've been really fabulous. You know, I liked you before, and I like you even better now. And I think you've said some really...
My wife calls you her new best friend, by the way.
That's right. And, you know, you've said, true, you've said some really, you know, honest, beautiful, warm kinds of things that I think, you know, most folks don't associate with New York City art dealers. And, you know, we've spoken with other New York City dealers in this course, and, you know, you're not alone. There are others. And, yeah, and it's pretty really, you know, I mean, if you group everybody together, it's a bunch of schmucks. But if you deal with everybody as individuals, 98% of them are fabulous. And I think you've been particularly wonderful, and I really appreciate that. Let me unmute everybody so that they can echo that sentiment. And thanks so much, and you're off the hook now. You did great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Franklin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Franklin, thank you for your thoughtfulness.
All right, man. Thanks so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.